Hello, everyone. I'm Traci Arieli, end-of-life doula and founder of Comforting Closure. Welcome to another episode. Today, we're going to talk about what it means to be an end-of-life doula in the United States, what it looks like to work with hospice and medical providers, how we help families, and the financial reality of working as a death doula. This is one of those conversations that comes straight from the bedside, not from theory or training manuals. I'm really happy to be welcoming back Danielle Slupesky. Danielle is the executive director of the New Mexico Death Care Network and founder of Conscious Crossroads, an end-of-life doula. We've both worked closely with hospice teams, and we've seen where hospice simply cannot cover everything families need. In this conversation, we talk openly about what works, where things break down, and what it actually takes to do this work in a way that is sustainable and ethical. So grab a warm drink, find a comfortable seat, and join us for the conversation. Danielle, welcome and thank you so much for being here. Again, I love when you're a guest.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to be back. I think this is my second time, so I'm really happy to be here.
So let's just get into it. And I'm curious, and we'll both answer this question because it's kind of a fun one. When you tell people what you do, what reaction do you usually get?
It's interesting. There's usually some variation of one of three. There are those who there's a visible kind of, and this like slight pullback, and then they kind of catch themselves, and then they paste the polite smile on their face. That's interesting. But I think more often what I get is, oh, I wish I knew about you when, and then it's insert the death of my grandmother, my mother, my husband, whomever. And so I think I wish I knew about you when is probably the most common. And then every once in a while, there's that kind of voyeuristic sort of really interesting. Tell me more, and like they want to hear like the gory, morbid details, that they think that this job is. So it's some variation of those three usually.
Yeah, I usually get a lot of people, if a person has experienced a death, especially if they're close to that person, it is like that second one. They're like, oh, I really wish that I knew you because it is so needed. We had such a tough time. I get a lot of, oh, that is that's so needed. Bless you. Thank you for doing this work. So I get a lot of thank you for doing this work. And then there are those people who are really curious about it and want to talk about it. I was at a dinner where a person just wanted, as soon as they found out, they just wanted to talk about it. And I kind of hesitate, because it's a tough role to play. It's not an easy job. And so when I'm out to dinner, I will talk about it if people want to, but I kind of, it's not pleasant conversation a lot of times, right? It's not something people want to talk about.
Not always, for sure. I mean, especially if there's been some sort of recent loss or they're going through it currently with a family member or friend, then it's really tender. And then I don't know, I've been really surprised by how often the minute you give somebody the opening and the permission to talk about it, and you create this space that now all of a sudden that conversation just starts flowing and questions start pouring out and, stories start being told.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's because I have been doing this for a while and it's, I'm more confident or I have more experience, so I'm able to speak, about the subject more intelligently. But I noticed over the last, because I've been doing this for 3.5 years now, 4 years, and I've noticed that more people know about what an end-of-life doula is, and more people are open to having these conversations than a few years ago. Even, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, people were really apprehensive, and now people are okay or more okay with talking about what really goes on when people are dying.
I completely agree. And I think you and I started right about the same time getting out there
Yes.
and being more public and educating and whatnot. And it was a lot more challenging that first year, maybe year and a half versus where we are now. I think people like Elua Arthur have had a lot to do with that. You know, she's been really vocal. Her book has gained lots of traction. There are also a couple of really popular novels out right now with the protagonist as a death doula. You know, there's The Collected Regrets of Clover, The Book of Two Ways, you know, and so it's getting into people's awareness, into the lexicon of like, oh, now it's not so much oh, what's a death doula? It's oh, you're a death doula, you know?
And
And
on
so
TV now.
that shift has really happened.
Yeah, on TV now, and a lot of also newspapers are starting to carry stories, personal stories from death doulas. So it's interesting, and I think that because our country is becoming older, yeah, we hear the silver tsunami all the time, that term, that more people, this is relevant to many more people than it was even 5 years ago.
Oh, definitely. You know, I mean, I think the current stats are somewhere around 14 million solo agers in our country at the moment.
Yep.
You know, I mean, that's a lot of people who don't have the typical support structure of, you know, maybe partner, husband, wife, kids, whoever that is. Um, and yeah, who supports them? How do we create new structures and bring community back in a new way?
Yeah, I love the community death care, but even when people do have families, we are so, as a society, we're so far removed from death, we don't know really what that looks like. And so I have a lot of adult children who have moved out of the area. We see that families, children go off to college or children move out of the area. So most or many children don't live in the area of their parents. So that's almost like solo aging. But the lack of knowledge about what death really looks like, coupled with people not living close together, or two people having a job, and the kids having a job and are unable, even if they live close, to really jump into that role of caregiver, is that's in the United States in a nutshell, right?
Yes. You summed that all up pretty well.
So which brings me, I just said people don't understand what death looks like, and there are, I think, and until I became an end-of-life doula, my belief was this also, that when we go into hospice, you go into hospice right before you die, and they do everything. They cover everything. They're there 24 hours a day. And so when I talk to people about hospice and what it actually is, the surprise that they have, because and I want to take and preface this part of the conversation with people having the knowledge that I really love hospice. I think that hospice is a team of people. It's not a place, and it can happen anywhere. And I have such gratitude for our hospice workers. People do not realize how hard these people work. And like the rest of the medical community, there is a shortage of people to do this job. So they're unable, for a couple reasons, to take and sit long periods of time with people. Most, not all, hospice companies, but also they have requirements that are put on them through Medicare and Medicaid and insurance companies, which makes it really difficult for them to work the way as individuals that they would like to take care of people. So going into this conversation, please keep that in mind. And I've never heard an end-of-life doula say, oh, they don't appreciate what hospice does, or they don't, they're not really excited to work with a hospice team, because I absolutely love working with them.
Well, and they're a necessary part of this journey, and that while death is not only a medical process, there are a lot of medical things that happened around death and around end of life. And hospice can help provide a very comfortable, peaceful end of life process for both the person leaving and support for family. And like you mentioned, just like all other parts of our medical system, those resources are stretched thin. But before we move on to speak to some of that confusion, I think it is important to note that the word hospice can mean so many different things. It is a philosophy of care, right? A philosophy of what end of life care should look like. It is a team of people that provide that care. Sometimes it is a place that you can go to receive that care, and it's an insurance benefit. And so when we say the word hospice, we expect the lay public to understand the nuances of all of those little definitions. And without a ton of education, I mean, it's an unrealistic expectation. And I think many in the medical field just hold that everybody understands that hospice is all of those things.
Yeah. And I think that there's a misconception of you go to hospice right before you die. And it's unfortunate. I think Jimmy Carter did a lot to get some knowledge out there of this is not just you're there for a week, which that's what I find, that most people are there for a couple days to a week, or they take advantage of hospice care, very close to the end of their lives. And it is unfortunate because when I work with people, we make a plan. And part of that plan is interviewing different hospice companies and finding the one that's right for the person and understanding hospice and taking advantage of it as far out as possible. I mean, you get very good benefits from insurance. Insurance will cover all of the medicine, the care that you're going to get from the hospice team, equipment, your hospital bed, all of these different things that are needed to make you as comfortable as possible. But the hospice team is really there to make you comfortable, to make your quality of life as good as possible. And they do that, not only from the hospice nurse, which everyone is familiar with, but they have they have a social worker, they have spiritual guidance, they have chaplains that are that are non-denominational. They don't take and just care about one certain spirituality or religion. So they have and the social workers are amazing. Anything you need, they take care of. So of course the doctors also.
Yes. Yeah. And that's the thing. I think currently our average stay in hospice is 8 to 14 days. And when the insurance benefit is available to you at that 6-month mark, right? So meaning that a doctor determines that if left untreated, your disease process is likely to end your life within 6 months. That doesn't mean that that it ends at that 6-month mark, right? You can continually be recertified. I currently work with a woman who's been on hospice for 4 years. She has end-stage dementia, and she's still doing really well and physically, and so she continues to be on hospice and continues to be recertified. So I think it's really important to highlight what we are here, that the earlier you start to take advantage of these services, very often your quality of life improves and oftentimes extends your time on the planet as well. So it's not just increasing your quality, but your quantity.
Yeah. And there's been studies that have shown that. And I can't quote the studies now, but if people want to know, I'm sure I could find them for you. And let's talk about the shortcomings of hospice and why the role of the end-of-life doula came into being. So hospice, I think one of the myths that people have about hospice is that they're there 24 hours a day. Now, I always tell people, family members, husbands, spouses and children, that they could either be their spouse, they could either be a daughter or son, or they can be a caregiver. They cannot be both. Being a caregiver is a full-time plus job. You won't be able to be, if you don't receive help, you're not going to be working. You're going to be working as a caregiver. So It's very important. And so Medicare doesn't cover 24-hour-a-day care with hospice. So they're there, depending on where you are in your process, they might be coming one time a week for 45 minutes to an hour. They might be coming a couple times during, when you're actively dying. With some hospice teams, you will be lucky to have someone there every day for an hour and a half. There are a few hospices that I've worked with, that one in particular who's amazing in the Bay Area, that they actually have made it so that their nurses could spend as much time as you need, which is a rarity. So there's that gap. And so I want to talk about your experience when you come in and you're with a family who, as I said, most families aren't aware that this is going to take place. So what's your experience with that?
As far as with working with hospice?
Working with hospice and working with families and really educating them. And then what is the gap that we fill?
Doulas don't, because we are not reimbursable currently, right? There's no time frame that somebody's allowed to see us within. There's no specified number of visits that we get. There's no specified number of time or amount of time that we can spend. And so I think one of our biggest benefits and the space that we fill is actually relational, right? We develop a relationship with this client, with this family. They're not our patient. They're not, one of 10 or 12 that I'm going to have to see that day and then have to sit spending 2 hours documenting and charting on. They're one of 2 or 3 that I might be working with at any given time. And I get to know their past stories. We do legacy projects together. We start interviewing hospices. We do all of this work way before we're in the active dying time, where hospice tends to come in and tends to work in the time surrounding active dying, and they're mitigating the medical symptoms. They're mitigating the pain, the shortness of breath, the possible anxiety or agitation, taking care of the physical needs for the most part. And then the doula is there kind of talking about, like what you said, making sure that daughter gets to be daughter, wife gets to be wife, bringing ceremony and ritual and sacredness back to the entire process, helping us recognize it's not just medical. Medical is one part of what's happening here, but there's so much more. And helping families explore that, explore what their options are, and if this could go the way that they would like it to, ideally, what would that look like? And let's get as close to that death as possible.
I love, we've talked a lot. We're friends outside of this little episode here. I love the fact that, doulas do so much. I mean, we run the gamut as far as what we offer. And what you and I are really drawn to, we're at different parts of the journey. You are so passionate and you love the vigiling and actually, and I love that too, but you're like, that's what, if you could focus on one thing, that is the thing that you would do. And me, I love the preparation. I love the paperwork. I love, making sure people are getting the most from their Social Security benefits. Like, I like the practical work. When I love grief work a lot. And I'm at a point where if a family they call me and they're actively dying, I will help, but it's not. A lot of times I will find someone to fill that need, because I really like the preparation and getting to know the family. I like having that relationship with the family. So it's really, I'm hesitant to come in last minute. But I like having those relationships, and I like the after and making sure the family is well taken care of, which you do that also, but it's really funny seeing the difference. And all doulas, every single doula we get trained on everything. We can do it all as far as that journey, that end of life journey. But we're, like all humans, we love certain parts of the job more than others.
And as you're saying that, I'm realizing too that I think part of why I am so comfortable kind of coming in that, 11th hour kind of moment. I was an ER nurse for years, right? Like everything is that.
Yep.
Here's the 5 things we know about this person, go, and like figuring it out and kind of working in that high energy situation, and then being the one that can kind of help come in and lower the energy, shift the focus. And that's been really nice to be able to do alongside medical teams. I've been able to work even, with folks that aren't necessarily at home on hospice, maybe be in an ICU setting and we're withdrawing life support. And so to kind of model for all of the medical staff and the respiratory therapists and the nurses who are doing the tasks that need to be done, that it's like, okay, hold on. The tasks are very secondary right now. Let's everybody slow down. Let's all take a couple breaths together. Let's honor what's actually going on. And that has been really neat for me personally, coming from the medical side of things, where that's not how we were taught to handle death. It was very much death was seen as a failure. Death is what happens when everything we have doesn't work. And my view now could not be further from that. So it's been neat to kind of help with some of that modeling and education on the medical side.
And I love that you bring up the medical field, because I think it's really interesting. I don't come from a medical background, but I find it so interesting that the people who are least likely to talk about death with their clients, and it's changing. You want to say that, but our doctors is a medical field, and I am working with another company on how do we have those conversations? How do we ensure that not only are doctors having those conversations with people, what kind of training, but in residential care communities? Because people who work at residential care communities, they are still uncomfortable with talking about death and end of life, which then cascades down to families and families not being able to have those conversations. So how do we change that?
That's a great question. I actually just presented for a medical school in Florida. I did a remote presentation for their medical students. They plan to bring me back in the fall. So I think that's a big part of it, is getting there from the beginning while they're in school. Let's get comfortable with these conversations before you're ever out there actually working with patients. I think the same thing needs to happen on the nursing side. All of medical care. I mean, again, it's not part of our normal education process in that field for the most part. And I have a story that just perfectly highlights this that just happened within the last few weeks. I had a couple reach out to me. The husband had liver cancer, and they knew that they had a PET scan upcoming, an oncology appointment upcoming to review that. And then 2 days later, they were scheduled to meet with me for the first time, because then they would have a better idea of where treatment was headed. So he met with his oncologist, got his PET scan results on a Tuesday. Our visit was on Thursday. I took one look at him and was like, we need to get hospice in here now. Like now. He ended up dying Thursday night. His doctor just changed his treatment plan, which hadn't even started yet. So there was no discussion of hospice. There was no discussion of, here's the clinical picture I'm seeing and what this means for you. So there was no preparation for this family, and he didn't even make it onto hospice service. We weren't able to get the evaluation done in time. And so again, if that doctor had been taught, educated on how to have these conversations way prior to this moment, how different might this man's death have been? How different may his last moments with his wife have been?
Yeah. And I think that it's not only the responsibility of the doctors, the oncologists, but I think that those are the conversations when you have a new general, GP, a new doctor. Part of the intake and conversation with that doctor should be advanced directive. What do you want? But not only that, the doctor should understand, and I know this is unrealistic in the United States, but the doctor, in an ideal world, a doctor should really understand the person's values, right? And this is how it used to be, right? When we had the town doctor and it was, and like I know that when I was growing up, I had a doctor from the time I was a baby through, high school. And that doctor knew everything about me and knew everything about my family, but knew my values. And so that's part of the conversation, that quality of life conversation, because that will help the doctor plan with you what should happen and make decisions. And it's unfortunate that that does not happen. And it's funny that you told that story, the oncologist, on a personal level. I went in for a minor surgery. I think I told the story once, but before, but I went in for just a minor, surgery. This was at Kaiser, big group, medical group here, and I handed my advanced directive to the nurse, and I wanted to have a conversation with her. She looked at me like I was like she had no idea what to do. She didn't even know how to upload this. She's like, "Oh, we can talk later about uploading." I have no idea how to do that. And then I was rolled into the room, but I got there early and I talked to the surgeon. I was like, "Yeah, let's talk about this just in case." He actually laughed. He's like, "Oh, nothing's going to happen. You're fine." I'm like, "I understand. I'm healthy, but you don't know. You can't say with 100% certainty. So let's just, this is what I want." But he handed me back my piece of paper and that's it, and it's interesting. It really is.
It's sad. That hits me on a personal note. I was 30 years old when I landed myself in the hospital for 3.5 months and required resuscitation and multiple major surgeries. And my husband was making decisions for me. And so because we're young and healthy doesn't mean much of anything in this particular conversation, right? Anybody over the age of 18 should have this paperwork done, should have these conversations with their medical providers, should have these conversations with the healthcare proxy or agent that they've chosen to make decisions for them. And yeah, to be laughed at by your surgeon in that moment, like how dismissive. I'm so sorry that
He was
happened.
uncomfortable. He was clearly uncomfortable because he doesn't have these conversations. It was obvious. In the United States, and everyone listening knows knows what's happening with our care, knows what's happening with insurance. What do you think is most fragile about end of life care in the United States today for families? What do you think?
Just like pretty much everything, it comes down to finances and economics. Yep. We don't have enough resources in any bucket, right? There's not enough time. There's not enough man hours. There's not enough people to do the work. There's not enough money to pay for the work. There's not enough insurance coverage of the work, right? There's just not enough resources in this realm at the moment. And it's a little frightening, I think we have some really great opportunities to try to build new systems and structures, but it's a little scary to me at the moment when I look forward at my future in this country as someone without children. My husband and I talk about it often, that I don't know what that's going to look like when our time comes, when we get there. And so I think that that's what it comes down to for me is resources.
I totally 100% agree. Medicare is running out of money. They're making decisions that take and benefit people who don't need the benefit, who are financially stable and well off and have more money than they could ever use. Not trying to get political. But this is a non-political issue, everyone. We're talking about people, real people. We're talking like you and me. And I would 100% agree with you that it is about where are we going to get the resources to take care of people, to take care of our older people, especially also.
I have a friend that just recently moved to a different state where they have different rules around Medicaid and assistance and whatnot. She is a senior that is disabled. She cannot have more than $143 in her bank account in order to receive services. And $143 a month. Like, you can't eat on that. That won't cover food. So, yeah, we're going to have to do some things differently here. Or I think we're going to be looking at a little bit of like a Les Mis situation on our hands.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be the next kind of French Revolution situation. If at some point we don't shift our focus and we don't shift from this hoarding of resources by the few, and it needs to be spread amongst the many in a completely different way.
Yeah, well, you see what's happening in California now, where there's, we're voting on a wealth tax, and this is for anyone that makes over $1 million, I think. And to be taxed. We're just talking about 5% tax on, and I know that that's scary for many people having to pay more taxes, but these people aren't paying taxes on this money, and so. It just is really unfortunate that in a country as wealthy as ours, that the majority of people in our country cannot afford health care. And we're not talking about, 5% of people, 10% of people. The majority of people in our country cannot afford health care. I've talked to people who have hired people that will help with caregiving, will show up and these are not simple tasks, but everyday tasks that need to be done. Will help bathe a person, will help cook for the person, because you get to a point when you're ill and you get old that you can't cook for yourself. You can't take care for yourself. You're aging in place, you're living at home. This can cost 8, 10, in states like Ohio, Kentucky, where we're not talking California, $8,000, $12,000 a month, because they need that level of care. And that's usually coming out of a person's bank account, or they have to sell their home to pay for it. And that only lasts for so long. And we're not talking about medical bills at that point. We're talking about just the everyday help that person needs to get through the day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's, this conversation can get pretty historical, and we go back a long time of our under or non-valuing of caregiving and nurturing and feminine work, right? That it is just expected that usually the mother in the household, the daughter in the household, like is taking care of the kids and taking care of her parents and doing all of these things. And that was just expected as unpaid labor. And now if that person is out working in the workplace as well, who's left to do that work? And we never valued it to begin with. So now we don't pay these people, but barely over minimum wage, and give them one of the most valuable jobs in society, to care for our elders, to care for our wisdom keepers, and we wonder why the care isn't great, right? We've never valued this type of work. And so, we could really dive into that for a while, and I don't want to get us too off topic, but I think that wraps its conversation around too, to doulas being expected to volunteer their time, expected to give their time, energy, and expertise.
What a great segue into the next question or thought that I have about the realities of being an end-of-life doula, and financially what that means. So, we all have seen the advertisements, maybe us a little more since we're doulas, so we get, the algorithm. Um, but I see advertisements all the time, come, be trained as an end of life doula. I make the person who's running the program, I make six figures and I work when I want to. And what have you found is the reality of trying to make a living as an end of life doula? Let's go there.
So I think just the fact that so many training programs have popped up over the last few years is a huge indicator that many doulas aren't making it as doulas on their own. I think a lot of those folks that are maybe bringing in six figures or even high five figures are running training programs, and they're making their money by teaching other people, not necessarily by doing the bedside work. I've been at this since September of 2022 and making a pretty good run of it, pretty good go of it. I've been very busy. I've worked with 32 clients that have died in that time. So I've had an average of about 10 a year, which I think for anybody who understands this work recognizes that's about as maxed out as I can handle mentally, emotionally, time-wise, and whatnot. My business feeds itself, but my husband feeds me. I am not making enough money to live on. I am not making enough money to pay all of my bills. If I were a single person doing this, there's no way I could do this work right now. Not in this way. I would have to be supplementing it with something else. And so I think the only way that doulas are making it right now is by diversifying. Speaking engagements, workshops, bedside work, planning. Some of us are doing things like Reiki or massage or Social Security consulting work or all of these different things to fill in the gaps, because bedside work alone is not cutting it at the moment.
Yeah. I'm very diverse in my offerings. And I am lucky. I, like you, like if I had to do this work myself, would I be able to? I live in the Bay Area. That's a no. That really is a no. So my husband and I am very lucky that I have Oren, and his business. Part of his business feeds well into mine because he has a production company. He's a videographer. And so I do a lot of legacy work, and we do a lot of life stories. And I love the life stories because I find it really interesting, and working with people and hearing their stories. With any company, it doesn't matter what type of business it is. The first year, you actually usually lose money. The second year, you will be so lucky to break even. And then the third year, like when I made my business plan, this is what I said. First year, lose money. Second year, break even. Third year, I'll start making money. That was my plan. And I was just very lucky that I started making money right away, but it wasn't a lot. It was just like, right, And so the reality is you have to be able to step away from your comfort zone. You noted that even if you want to do this work and that's all you want to do, you can't do it full time. You can't do 40 hours a week of this mentally, emotionally. Not only is it emotionally, I want to be there emotionally for my clients, and you do get emotionally attached. But I have a business to run, which takes a lot of time.
Yes. I hear you loud and clear. And it has been a big challenge over the last few years. And I don't think that many of the training schools are adequately preparing doulas who are coming out of those programs for the challenges ahead. There are a couple that have got like some business ideas, and okay, here's some PowerPoint slides you can use. Here, just go ahead and go use these PowerPoint slides, and now you can make these presentations and great. But they're not talking to you about you call that assisted living community to give that presentation, and you hear an answer like, it's against our corporate policy to use the word death.
Yes.
oh, okay, I thought I was just supposed to call you and I would come give presentations and then people would hire me because that's what they said, and it's like, no, no, there's all of these little fun barriers you get to figure out how to work through and work around and work over and work under and and educate around. And it's a challenge. It's a lot to juggle all at once.
It is. It used to be that being audited, the tax man was the most, I'm not going to say hated, but disliked person. Well, guess what? When you're brought in, it's very scary for people. And so it's a hard sale. It is a hard sale to especially when people believe that hospices do it all and hospices will be there around the clock. And all hospices, I should say, they do have volunteers that do similar things. So I know that when I volunteered with hospice, yeah, I did vigil sitting. It was different. There isn't that planning that you like. They don't help you plan. The volunteers won't help you plan like we do here. But I'm curious, why do you think that doulas are still regarded as optional or as volunteers, especially by hospice groups? I mean, who benefits by keeping this work as volunteer, right?
Most people who go into the medical profession in any capacity, in any part of that profession, do so because they want to help people. And I think that people who choose to go into end of life palliative and hospice care, that is maybe even the foremost value that they have, right, is helping, and they're very heart-centered and empathic. And they went into this work because they want to do all of the things that the doulas are doing. Right? They want to sit and have the conversations. They want to hold hands. They want to get to know families. They want to write letters to loved ones and do legacy projects. They want to spend time educating and on the dying process and disease process itself. That's what they went into this for. And now they're in it and they realize that they are a cog in a broken machine. And they have, like I said, those 10 to 12 people to see today. And they're fighting with pharmacies and insurance companies and providers that are out of state and whatnot. And they lose sight of what the actual care is. And so I think part of where the friction comes from is that hospice teams see doulas coming in and getting to do all the stuff that they want to do. Yeah. And there's this little bit of resentment there of like, well, we don't need you. We do all of this. As a social worker, I do legacy projects. I do all of these things. Never mind the fact, again, they have this entire caseload, so they can't give that time and energy to individual patients and families. So I think that's where a lot of the tension arises. There's also fear from the leadership side of things because we're not licensed or regulated at this point. So for them to refer to non-licensed, non-regulated professionals is in a way kind of admitting that they can't cover all of the patient's needs. And that gets them in trouble with CMS and Medicare and all of that. Because as far as Medicare is concerned, that's what hospice is for, is they will cover all of the needs, psychosocial, emotional, spiritual, and physical of that family and patient. And we know that that's not the case. It's impossible for the system to do that. And so I think there's that fear from the leadership side and a little bit of, but they're doing what I want to do from the caretaking staff side.
Yeah. When I do grief work, and not only do I do the grief work part of it, but I also do a lot of practical work. The practical work. I make sure that the bills are being paid. And I will actually sit next to a person and open their email with them. I make sure that they're eating. If I'm at their home and I see that the refrigerator is empty, well, guess what? We're going to order food or we're going to go out shopping. What does a person need to start to come out into life again? I talked to one of my friends who's a social worker, and she said, I wish I could do that. That's why I got into being a social worker, but because of all the regulations and the rules, the boundaries that they need to have. I can tell you that I form relationships with my clients. They know Oren's name. When you go to a therapist, you don't know their husbands or their wives or their spouses' names if they're married. I form bonds, and I do have boundaries. It's not like they know my whole life story or know what, but how can you not? This is, you're with these people at the worst time of their lives, the most vulnerable times.
Yeah. And I think that you just perfectly highlighted what I said earlier about the distinction, right? Is that we develop relationship.
Yeah.
It's not a role to role interaction. It's not nurse to patient, social worker to patient, provider to patient, right? It's human to human, right? And then when we get closer and we're at that vigil time, I would argue it becomes soul to soul even, right? We completely lose all of the role to role. And now it's just this essence engaging with this essence, and like words don't matter anymore. And that's, I didn't get to have those experiences as a nurse. I didn't get to do those things. I had to go from bed to bed and move on. So yeah, I think that's a huge part of it, is we do what they want to do.
Yeah. And we really, that support of helping ease the fear of the family and the person who's dying before the act of dying phase, but the family before, during, and after is something that I can't even put in words. It is so needed, and is such an honor to do. And you're right, those boundaries, they fall away, and the only focus is making sure everyone is okay.
Absolutely.
So 2 more questions here. If people really understood what the end of life was, what do you think they would demand gets done? Let's look at their crystal ball there. Let's what do you think people?
Good question.
Yeah.
I think this is true of end of life care, but also all of healthcare, is that if we really understood what it takes to be healthy and well, right? And you can be healthy and well even as you are dying, right? It's a different form of health, but you can be mentally and emotionally and spiritually healthy throughout that process, even as the body is declining. We would demand more holistic care. We would not be comfortable with this top-down patriarchal, I am the provider who has deemed upon everybody below me that this is now the care plan and this is what we will all do. We wouldn't be okay with that. We would very quickly realize, like, this is what's important to me. And I want to pull in this part of care. I want support in this way. This type of spiritual care, this type of extra support, these alternative or complementary modalities, and for anybody who's just listening, I just put those alternative in air quotes. Yeah, I think we would just demand that we are an entire being. We're not just a physical body, and that entire being requires care and support. And we would demand that that's reimbursable.
And I see that things are starting to change. I love the story of you telling us that you are giving these presentations to medical schools. I think that's amazing. I also think it's generational also. My parents are from the silent generation. In case people don't know what the silent generation is, it comes before the boomers. They're older than the boomers. But even with the boomers also, that unwillingness to talk about death. You're not supposed to talk about death because they think that if you talk about it, it will happen, which is going to happen, period, regardless. But, but it's something you're not supposed to talk about. But I see the Xers, which is another generation that comes between the boomers and the millennials. For those of you that have never heard of Generation X, that I think we're starting to see those differences because Gen X is getting older and we are demanding more.
Watching our parents go through these processes and saying, like, yes, I don't want that. I do want that. Right. Okay. Yes. this works for me, that doesn't. And I think younger generations, probably X and forward, are so much less stuck in this is how it's always been done. This is the traditional way, like this is just how it is. As Smiths, we are buried in the family plot, and that's the end of it. And now all of a sudden it's like, no, there are all of these other options here, and there are all of these other professions available to offer support. So why wouldn't I take advantage of that? And so I think there's a lot more openness. But it's interesting. There's a woman in town here in Albuquerque named Gail Rubin, and her famous line is that talking about sex won't make you pregnant, and talking about death won't make you dead.
Yep.
Right? But talking about it on both ends, right, whether we're talking about sex education or end of life planning, you can help prevent a lot of unwanted consequences by having these conversations and being educated and knowing what your options are. So I think it's shifting and it's changing. But I think to come back to your original question, we would demand more holistic care.
Yeah. And I think that, to put it really bluntly, listen, either you're going to think about these decisions that you need to make, and you're going to make those decisions, or someone's going to make them for you. It's as simple as that. And let me assure you, you do not want people who do not know you, do not understand your values, making those decisions for you. And that includes not only doctors and nurses, but your own family members, your own brother and sister might have a very different view of what you want than you do. Last question. Now, this is the real crystal ball. Get out your magic 8-ball. How do you see death care changing? And I think you mentioned it, so I'm just going to put this out there, community death care. I love that term. Do you see that's the wave of the future? And what does it actually mean?
I do see that as the wave of the future because, again, what we're seeing in all of these different ways out there in the world, that institutions are not going to be there to take care of us, right? We don't have these safety nets. We can't rely on it to be there. And we've got to rally around and take care of each other in new ways. So that means knowing who your neighbors are, right? Getting involved in community centers, like developing tribe if it's not family. But I think that that's exactly where all of this is headed. And I've really been working towards that with a group of people here in New Mexico in the last year. We've started the New Mexico Death Care Network. And so we've brought together not just death doulas, but doulas and energy workers and massage therapists and hospices and green burial grounds and estate attorneys and financial advisors and real estate agents, right? Because all of these different professions are needed throughout the planning, active dying, and grief phases of life. We need to pull in all of these different professions at one time or another. So if we can rally around and not only support other professionals, right? Network with one another, educate each other, know who does what and who might get along with the best types of clients. I've got a huge toolbox of people to refer to now. And I really think that things are headed more towards that. The way we've structured it is we have a provider reimbursement program. And so rather than just asking doulas or any of these other professions I just mentioned to volunteer their time for people who can't afford their services, we pay the providers when you can't afford to. Mm-hmm. So say you needed a death doula and you can't afford one. You apply, we pay your doula directly for you. Hoping that keeps good providers in the field doing the work, and it helps take care of those that don't have the financial means to afford it on their own. And so I see more systems like that evolving, and the kind, empathetic ones of us that have more will be helping to take care of those who have less.
Yeah, and your network is not common in the United States, not yet. So hopefully,
not yet. My long-term goal would be to see it be just the death care network, and there are chapters in every state, and eventually that we have community hospice houses, not nursing homes. but places where people who don't have care, who don't have somewhere to live, who are maybe unhoused, have somewhere to go to die in a home-like setting, being cared for by their community, by people who care about them. So I think that we're going to have to lean into that because we don't have enough beds and we don't have enough medical staff to take care of people in the current medical model that we have now.
Definitely. Well, Danielle, I want to thank you for being back on the show and sharing your experiences and knowledge with us. Now, if people want to get a hold of you or learn more about the work you are doing, how can they contact you or learn?
Yeah, so I've got two websites. There's deathdouladanielle.com, and that's my private practice through Conscious Crossroads. So you can check me out on my website there, and there's a contact form you can fill out. And then the New Mexico Death Care Network is nmdn.org, as in New Mexico Death Care Network.org. And same thing, you can fill out a little form on there, and we'll get back to you promptly.
Great. And I will definitely take and list those in the description and everything I put out there. So thank you. Listeners, end of life care in this country asks a lot of families. It asks even more of the people who step in to help when the system falls short. Conversations like this matter because they help us name what is missing, what needs to change, and what we deserve at the end of life. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, please comment below or reach out to me directly. And if you found this conversation to be helpful, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. This is Traci Arieli from Comforting Closure, wishing you peace and comfort in your journey. Until next time, take care.